Hey, great to have you here. So today we're going to be talking about Dexter Original Sin Episode 9, titled Blood Drive. Before jumping into the episode details, I want to give some pre-episode thoughts, so here's some things I thought about prior to watching the episode. First thing I thought of was, do you think we're going to end this season with any teasers? I could see the last episode pretty much ending off with Dexter opening his eyes in Resurrection at the hospital. Something like that feels like it could be a good lead into Dexter Resurrection and give us a lot of hype between now and then. Hey, real quick, I realized as I was editing the video, I forgot to put the results in for the poll that I posted on my community tab. Wanted to share that with you guys and just talk a little bit about it further here. So I asked you guys what you thought about Tanya as far as what she potentially could be, a victim, a secret killer, or neither. Obviously, we've gotten one more episode at this point, so this was kind of pre that information from this episode, but wanted to share the feedback we got. So honestly, it was surprisingly pretty split across the board thus far. So as far as the three categories, victim, we have 35%. Secret killer, we have 34%, and neither we have 31% with 178 votes. So really appreciate your guys' feedback there, but awesome to see kind of the variety of opinions we have. So pretty split evenly across all three of those areas. If you're asking me personally, based off what we know today, I think secret killer is probably still the longest shot to be true just because we have no reveal of that to this point in time. Victim is kind of a stretch still potentially, but I still lean that direction because I think that could influence Deb to join Miami Metro, but we'll have to see there what happens here. But just wanted to share, it's kind of interesting to see the split opinions on what Tanya is and what her role is. Obviously, if she winds up being neither, she kind of feels a little irrelevant to the season, but they've done that before when they had the kind of red herring with the billionaire in New Blood. So maybe they're doing that here, you never know, but just want to share the feedback here, and it seems totally split across the board with all you folks. I do lean towards victim at this point, probably with neither being next up. Secret killer is probably lowest on my opinion at this point, but we'll have to see with the final episode. So back to the video. I went into this episode thinking about a few different theories, how they may close things out for the season. One of the things I thought of was maybe they'll have Tanya get close to Deb and have Tanya get killed off, and that be the motive for Deb to join Miami Metro. Not sure they'll go that route, but they definitely, in this episode, had some of the connection there that took place. On top of that, maybe having some kind of Vogel cameo here in the final episode in the flashbacks. Now that I've watched episode 9, I don't know how I feel about a lot of that because they didn't really hint at any of that going forward, so we'll have to see what plays out with maybe some potential there. On top of that, we had Desmond Harrington, aka Quinn, talk about Dexter this previous week, so really hoping we get him back in Resurrection. It'd be awesome to see some of the original cast, him being included there in Resurrection. One other thing that I did find, which this episode kind of stole my thunder with, actually, if you go back and watch episode 2, the very first crime scene that Dexter goes to, we see Brian Moser in the crowd there. You can see him wearing an orange hat, so I'll probably show some photos here showing what that looked like, but it was kind of a quick cut. But if you're looking for it and realize he's in the crowd, you can actually see him there, which, as I mentioned, we'll talk about later in this episode review. And then finally, before jumping into the actual episode details, I know we're nearing the end of Original Sin. I really appreciate you being here, and if you haven't, I'd be thankful for your sub, joining me for both the future of Dexter and other topics I plan to cover here on the channel. For example, I'm considering covering the new season of Yellow Jackets, so let me know if you'd be interested in that. So with all that out of the way, we're going to jump into the actual episode details here. First, at a very high level, so characters, as far as they go, overall, I felt like the cast of characters were really solid here. Deb was definitely more chill in this episode. I know a lot of people have given some criticism about her being very over the top, but I feel like that's fair for her character, but in this episode specifically, you'd probably be happy to see that she was a lot more mellow, a lot less all over the place with going crazy. Dexter himself, I didn't really enjoy as much in some areas, so I'll talk about that further in the details later on. There were some scenes where I didn't like him as much as a character, but that's probably fair. You're having a serial killer as your protagonist, so in some ways you're not supposed to always enjoy him. Harry here was better for me, especially in the flashbacks. He was definitely more likable and more realistic in a lot of scenes here. We didn't get a lot of other Miami Metro characters. Masuka is one that comes to mind. I know we had the scene with him at the blood drive. He was a good balance of being goofy there, but also very serious and supporting Bobby. So very fitting Masuka, knowing when to make jokes and knowing when to be really focused on helping people out. As far as the plot goes, we've finally closed out a lot of the side plots here. The flashbacks are mostly wrapped up at this point. The side drama with Deb and her boyfriend, all that stuff, really wrapped up last episode. We'll see if we get more of that in the future in the final episode. And then beyond that, we expanded on the Brian backstory quite a bit here. And then we progressed the Captain and Dexter drama and their back and forth they're having with each other, which will probably close out in the next and final episode. If I'm giving a review score for this episode, it may disappoint some of you guys, but I'm probably going to say neutral for this one. There's definitely a lot I liked about this episode, so it may be at the very top of neutral. But it wasn't as great as some other episodes in the season, and there were definitely some cracks here and there where I feel like it wasn't as strong personally. We'll have to see if they can end the show on a high note, though. So now jumping into the spoiler territory, so I'm going to break down the episode details. So a spoiler warning here if you don't want to hear some of the details we have here. But jumping in the beginning of the episode, it start off with a bingo game at a retirement home. and we have some older people there playing. And then we see Brian there, and he's playing next to some older woman as well. They're talking with one another while playing bingo, and Brian has all the color markers laying out in front of him, similar to the rainbow style that he has with the fingernails for the prostitutes in the original series. It felt a little bit over the top when they say hi to each other, and he says his name is Brian. We get that classic Dexter shock noise, but at this point, the audience knew it was Brian, so not sure we needed that there, but still fitting, I guess. We then cut to Harry and Maria showing up at the hospital for Bobby, and then kind of picking up off the last episode where we had Maria going through Harry's stuff and seeing that he grabbed the Brian Moser file. She grabs Harry aside and confronts him about that information. Harry gives some truth here. He mentions to her that, hey, this was from a vice case back in the day. His mom was killed, and it was all Harry's fault. Harry then goes on to say he wonders what happened to Brian and says he was a really sweet kid, and at least attempts to convince Maria that it's unrelated to the case they're working on. We then cut to our first flashback of the episode where you have Harry in Spencer's office telling Spencer that he's had an affair with Laura. Spencer looks the exact same here, so I guess he's just been around forever and does not change his appearance whatsoever. We have Harry push for them finding Laura. Spencer tells him he can join the charge to find Laura, but he's gonna have to do it in a uniform. And I know this is a small nitpick that people have been wondering about. The entirety of the flashbacks, Harry's been in kind of a just business casual attire, being a detective. And previously in the original series, we always saw him wearing a cop uniform. So people have been wondering, hey, why is he not wearing what he normally wore? And that was probably a little bit too nitpicking, but they did wind up coming full circle and saying, yes, when he shows up at the shipyard, he's going to be wearing the police uniform. So they finally gave a reason for him wearing that and ultimately met kind of the expectations for a lot of fans here. We then cut to the docks where there's a shipyard full of cops, all looking for Laura all day and night long. And then we weirdly cut back to present time with Spencer pretending to be traumatized and Dexter just really seeing right through it. There's kind of a weird visual here where you see Spencer standing there in a weird blur out of Spencer's background. So I don't know if it's supposed to imply Dexter clearly sees him and doesn't pay attention to any of the BS around him. We then cut to that evening and Dexter's investigating Spencer's apartment. Spencer winds up coming home actually with Harry. Dexter gets his syringe out and he's ready to go until he notices Harry's there. And then Spencer mentions, hey, I'll get a drink for us. And he goes to his room where Dexter's hiding at. He goes in there and he sees the curtains have been moving a little bit. He goes over to the sliding doors and opens it and doesn't see anyone there. We see below him, Dexter apparently just jumped off the balcony and climbed down from the second story, and he's just kind of sneaking away into the night. We then cut to the following morning with Dexter and Harry at breakfast, and Dexter says, hey, how's the serial killer situation going? And Harry kind of playing coy with Dexter here. He knows it's Brian, but doesn't want to say anything about it. We have Dexter think to himself, I'll never forget the first time my father lied to my face, which here's another example. I'll talk about it a little bit later on as well. I'm still a little bit mixed on who the narrator Dexter is, but the point of view we have for the entire season, because this comment definitely sounds like a future Resurrection Dexter comment where he's thinking back to the times he had with his father. So once again, kind of confusing as far as the point of view we have as the viewer. Deb winds up coming out and joining them and mentions to Harry she dumped Gio. Harry says, hey, no more dating older guys. She says something like, the heart wants what the heart wants, but I'll try. Clearly giving a little bit of a nod to Lundy, even Brian, maybe some other people that she's dated along the way. In this scene, we also find out that Bobby is actually Deb's godfather. Therefore, Deb wants to help out with the situation. Dexter winds up saying, hey, there's a blood drive going on. And Harry's like, hey, Dexter, take your sister to the blood drive at Miami Metro. We then cut to the flashback of the docks again. And it's been 3 days, apparently, they've been looking for her and haven't found anything. One of the cops eventually finds a container and then cracks it open. Once they open it, blood just rushes entirely out through the container. We have Harry run in there and grab Dexter pretty much from Brian's arms. Brian's like holding on to Dexter, and Harry grabs him out of Brian's arms. He winds up running out with Dexter. Then we have Bobby go in separately and grab Brian and bring him out as well. I feel like the show doesn't typically actually show the body parts here and there, but this scene is definitely more graphic than we've typically gotten, with her head being there and different body parts laying all over the place. And we have Brian who's just staring at it, and he's just being carried away as he's just focusing on it and is really mesmerized by it. We then cut back to present time where Nikki's being held hostage and food's being handed him through the slot again. But he knows the kidnapper's his dad at this point. He even calls it out. The captain then takes his mask off and pretty much acknowledges, yes, it's me. And he points out to the kid, hey, you didn't do anything wrong. This will all be over soon. So definitely giving a nod to, he's not mad at the kid necessarily. This is against somebody else, which most people at this point in time have assumed it's his wife, which definitely feels likely from this scenario. And it feels a little bit less likely, the reason being his kid's not actually his. It feels more like he's just mad at his wife at this point. We then cut to Dexter and Deb at Miami Metro for the blood drive. Dexter winds up leaving Deb and goes over the evidence. He sees the jersey of Nikki and goes and looks at it. He notices the blood's just on the front, nothing on the back. From this alone, he just knows that Nikki's still alive because I guess the previous kid, it came from the back of the head, which blood would be on the back of the jersey. Feels like a little bit of a reach, but fine, I guess. He has the evidence there. We then have Tanya come in and tell Dexter to be responsible for drawing blood for the blood drive. Then we separately cut to Maria, who's asking Camilla for case files on the Estrada case. She's digging through the files here, and it feels like this scene is definitely meant for the audience and not meant for Laguerta herself, because she's like looking through the stuff and mentions out loud, says, Oh, one son, Brian Moser, which she didn't know that Laura had a couple kids. So the fact that she verbally said that and was kind of surprised to see that be information felt a little bit fan service, or just kind of for the fans to hear her say that rather than her actually naturally doing that in that scene. Afterwards, we have Camilla call Harry and report back to him. Obviously, Camilla's kind of Harry's secret spy. She knows about Dexter in some fashion. She's always kind of been on his side for a lot of this stuff, so she calls to tell him, hey, Maria's off the case at this point in time. No evidence was given to her. Camilla also mentions to Harry, there's no details on Brian's current life. We then see the hospital note that Harry grabbed, noting about Brian's obsession with his brother. We then cut to a flashback of a woman who appears to be a social worker telling Harry and Doris not to separate Brian and Dexter. They need to be coming together. And it's the woman from the bingo scene at the very beginning with Brian, so clearly she's next at this point. We have Doris hear the backstory of Laura and Dexter and Brian. She then asks Harry separately, is this the woman from your affair? He says yes. She then goes over to the boys and is really insistent on keeping both Brian and Dexter, so it seems like Doris has her heart in the right place here. We then have a transition from baby Deb to teenage Deb back at Miami Metro. As she's kind of just roaming the halls, she goes up to Maria, talks to her for a little bit. Tanya winds up grabbing her and talking to her separately. They wind up doing some small talk and talking about sports. Tanya then drops the hint to Deb, hey, we could use some women on the force. So definitely setting up that pathway for Deb to join Miami Metro. Not sure we'll get more there. Obviously, I mentioned at the very beginning my thoughts of maybe Tanya dies and that really encourages Deb to join Miami Metro. Not sure we'll get that fully to happen or not, but either way, breadcrumbs by Tanya have been given to Deb to join the force at this point in time. We then cut to Dexter, who's running the blood drive. He says something like, this is not the blood drive I was hoping for. The captain winds up coming in to donate some blood, and we get kind of a weird scene here where Dexter knows about him, and he's really trying to poke him a little bit here and there. He weirdly touches the captain's heart at one point and says something like, hey, nice veins, really being kind of stalkerish to him. He also gives a line, I can't imagine the pain you and your wife must be in. And then the captain goes, ex-wife. So, yep, we kind of get the point at this point in time where his ex-wife is really responsible for the captain doing a lot of this stuff. They have some small talk back and forth. The captain asks Dexter if he found anything helpful in the evidence. Dexter tells him Nikki's likely alive based off the information I shared earlier about the jersey on the front, not the back. And then Dexter asks him, hey, why do you think the cartel would target children? Captain responds with saying, oh, they're evil animals. And Dexter's like, I agree, and rips the blood drawing out of his arm and says internally, chalk that up to foreplay. That scene essentially ends with some final small talk between the captain and Dexter. Dexter saying he's making some progress on a cold case and says something like, tonight could even be the night. Afterwards, Dexter starts studying the plastic bag that the captain used for the jersey. And he's trying to get some prints off of it, trying to figure out, hey, is this the captain for sure? Which that was at the crime scene that the captain was at, so I'm not sure necessarily for public use that would be super helpful. Maybe for Dexter personally, he'll feel more vindicated if he finds prints off of it. Here we finally get a Clark appearance, so I and a lot of people have been a little bit worried since we haven't seen Clark visually in quite a while. He finally shows up here. He kind of secretly grabs Dexter and mentions to him, hey, a former partner of mine apparently had HIV. I'm not sure if I have it, so I can't really donate, but I want to be a team player. So Dexter winds up donating blood on Clark's behalf, pretending to be Clark. Afterwards, we have Masuka come to the room and says Dexter hasn't donated any blood. I don't know how he would know this unless we want to say the person initiating the blood draw can't be doing it on themselves. That's the only way maybe Masuka would know this information. Dexter tells Masuka he's afraid of needles, but Masuka really pushes, hey, we're doing this for the Force, we're doing this for Bobby. Definitely need to donate, so Dexter winds up getting blood drawn from his other arm. So at this point, Dexter's donated blood twice, which feels like there's going to be some implication for things happening later on. We then cut to a flashback of Brian telling Doris, hey, Dexter wants a sandwich. So she sets Deb down in the crib and goes to make a sandwich for Dexter. Separately, we have Brian hearing Deb cry. He grabs a pillow and he puts it over her head, and it takes a little bit of time, but Doris realizes this, runs over and grabs him off of her. So this scene really sets up Brian as being unstable at this point. I don't know if this kind of retcons the original storyline where Harry didn't take Brian, from my understanding in the original series, because Brian was too old when the traumatization of the Laura Moser thing happened, and he felt like he was unsalvageable because of that. Feels like in some ways that's retcon, because we see in this scene here, which it makes more sense doing it this way, but we see that Brian and Dexter are both actually going to be part of Harry and Doris's life, but it seems like Brian's unstable and creating a lot of conflict at the home, so that's going to lead to Brian wind up leaving, but at this point in time, it definitely feels like they were going to intend to keep him, which seems separate from what they did previously, but maybe that's just kind of a small detail that they could have changed, and maybe you could say in the original series, hey, maybe they did wind up taking him, but we just didn't get this backstory, so there's some possibility there. Afterwards, we have Harry sit Brian down and try to talk to him. Brian just starts yelling and asking for his mom and says he hates all of them. He punches the front door glass and just breaks it with blood all over his hands and really runs away. We then close the scene out with Doris grabbing Dexter and really trying to comfort him, definitely giving the implication, hey, we want Dexter, we don't want the other kid, we don't want Brian. We then cut to present time where Harry's doing some research on his own for the NHI murders. Maria just came up to his desk though, and as soon as she leaves, he's like muttering Brian's name under his breath as he's looking through all these photos, which feels a little bit odd. I get the point is he's trying to do some research and clearly giving us, the audience, some awareness that hey, he's seeing Brian in a lot of these pictures, but I'm not sure that's the setting he should be doing it at. Either way, he's going through the photos and he notices what I noticed about the second episode of the season, where we see Brian in the background of that crime scene. Suddenly we see a bunch of photos of the crime scenes that Harry notices, hey, Brian's in the background here. Brian's in the background here. One of them was really strange. There was like just a cop and some construction people, and Brian was the only other person there. Feels like when he was in the scene in episode 2, where he's in the background, he's just amongst a lot of citizens there, just kind of onlooking. But in some of those photos, he's like the only person who's not with law enforcement there, or not part of the crime scene in general. After he notices Brian in all of these photos with the clearly orange University of Miami hat, he comes to the realization, hey, Brian's actually stalking Dexter. We then cut to Brian, who's hanging out with the bingo woman. I think he suggests bringing her to dinner or something like that. They wind up going out to his car, which he has this really large, sketchy van, opens up the back, and he mentions to her his name, and somehow she remembers him. I don't know if this is realistic. I don't know how many cases she may have, but you have a lot of people forgetting names from different timelines. Like you had Batista forget Harrison's name. You had presumably Laguerta forget Brian's name in the original series from Now Till Then. But you have the social worker remember Brian Moser's full name after he says his name is Brian from when he was a kid. So some of the discrepancies, I get people have different memories, so maybe that's kind of chalk it up to that. But either way, she remembers this is Brian. He winds up punching her, knocking her out, and closing the door on her. We get a very brief side plot scene with Deb at home, and she gets a voicemail from Florida State talking about her scholarship potential, and the assumption here is, hey, you got canned because of what you did. But they actually say, despite what happened, we want to wind up talking to you, so she's pumped to hear that. We then cut to Dexter, who's at the arcade where Nicky wound up playing with his dad, and he's setting up a kill room here. A little bit weird here, once again, I feel like personally, that we have another public place where Dexter's setting up this kill room. We had it with the sports arena earlier on in the season. Now we're having it at this arcade that he broke into, and he's pretty woozy from giving blood twice, so definitely feels like there's going to be some implications there. And he says to himself, note to self, giving blood is harder than taking it, which is kind of funny there. We then cut to Spencer, who's coming home, and he sees a note on his front door that gives the implication it's from the guy. So when he previously gave that bag and money to that one person who dropped the jersey off at the cartel's house, we're assuming it's supposed to be from this person. We, as the audience, pretty much know Dexter forged this. He tells the guy, hey, come to this location. I'm going to tell everybody about the situation unless you pay me $5,000. We have the captain get super pissed here, and he pretty much ends the scene with going and grabbing his gun. We then cut to the hospital where Harry's there with Bobby in his room, and Harry's kind of doing the typical thing where you have somebody who is passed out clearly and receiving medical attention, and Harry's just talking to them, not expecting them to actually hear anything, telling Bobby about the whole situation with Brian and his concerns there. And then we notice Bobby squeezed Harry's hand a little bit, so we see some life to him. Then Harry winds up going up and listening to him, and actually Bobby tells him, save Dexter. So Harry's super pumped to see Bobby's all good to go and gets that information from Bobby saying, all right, I'm going to do what I can. We then cut to the flashback of Harry and Doris telling the social worker about what Brian did and that they're pretty much afraid of him but really love Dexter. She winds up then taking Brian away despite previously saying that she wouldn't separate the boys. We then cut to present time where Spencer shows up at the arcade. He walks in there and Dexter is coming up from behind him a little bit woozy, stabs Spencer. Spencer turns around, he stabs him right through the hand. So we see the needle coming out the other side of Spencer's hand, and then they wind up fighting for a little bit. Dexter winds up pushing him back, so through his hand, the needle winds up going through his neck as well, so Spencer gets knocked out there. Internal monologue Dexter gives the comedic line of, hey, never give 2 pints of blood on stalk and kill days. Spencer then wakes up to Dexter playing on an arcade machine there. He puts in Nicky's initials for the high score that he got. I was kind of expecting and hoping to see some maybe Easter egg on the high score list, maybe like a DDK, something that would have been a little bit of a nod to something else in the series. As far as I know, we don't get that here, but then we have Dexter approach Spencer and give him the typical forehead finger push that he's known to do. Dexter's then pressing Spencer pretty hard, and Spencer's pretty much denying everything. Dexter goes through the timeline, revealing kind of all the information that he has, and Spencer pretty much admits here that his ex-wife was the motive. However, since Nicky's still alive, Spencer kind of uses this as a bargaining chip and tells Dexter, hey, if you kill me, you're never going to find him, he's going to starve to death. Then Dexter winds up cutting off his finger, and then says the line internally, this is the worst case of serial killer blue balls I've ever had, which once again points to, is this future Dexter talking? Because he's only killed a few people, so not sure, once again, with the narrator there. I will point out also in this specific scene, Patty Gibson, I don't like him as much as Michael C. Hall. In this scene only, it feels like in this situation, despite him being the good guy and the captain being the bad guy, I'm kind of rooting for Aaron Spencer here. Dexter comes off pretty arrogant and full of himself, which may be the intention, because I know originally with the show writing, they killed Dexter off in New Blood originally because they didn't want to really glorify serial killers, so maybe the intention is don't always have Dexter appear to be a good guy. In these scenes, he needs to be a bad guy. We then have Dexter accidentally cut part of the rap and then leaves. At the moment, I'm wondering, why is Dexter leaving here? Is he leaving for him to think? Are you too woozy? You need to really collect yourself? Because my thoughts are, the following day, the arcade's probably open, so you only have a few hours to clean this stuff up and take care of everything. So you're kind of just leaving this when you have a limited amount of time. We get some answers there later, but obviously the captain's able to get away at this point. One thing that they could have done in this scene that they did at the beginning of the season in episode 1 is have some kind of montage. It would have been interesting since Brian and Dexter are pretty much the same person. You could have had him taking out Spencer. You could have had Brian taking out the social worker, going back and forth with a similar ritual as one another. But obviously they didn't go with that route here. They separately had Dexter's stuff end, and then we cut to Brian at this point in time though. He has this social worker tied on top of this building, and he's really confronting her about the whole situation. She tells him she did what she thought was best. He then grabs the chainsaw and gets all creepy, and he says, "You separated me and my brother, now I'm gonna separate you," which, if it wasn't a murder scene, I feel like that's a very comedic line, honestly. He then revs the chainsaw and starts chainsawing her up with a big smile and just blood splattering everywhere. Then once again, combining that with the Laura flashback scene, feels like this episode has a lot more violence shown to us than really any other episodes typically have had. I also know a lot of people have pushed for a Brian spinoff. We kind of get that here in this episode. I know it's a little more compact than a full season of things, but this episode is kind of like a Brian spinoff where we're getting his backstory, different actions he's taking, and his stalking of Dexter, and ultimately taking out people that he feels wronged him in the past. We then cut to the captain leaving the arcade, getting into his car, and taking off. At this point, we realize, hey, this was Dexter's plan all along. He meant for the captain to escape. I have a few questions with this scene and the way they ended the episode. Dexter feels like he was too woozy to take the captain out, but he's not too woozy to drive, obviously. On top of that, we're banking on the captain just going to where Nikki's held captive. That's where he's driving to. I don't know. If I'm the captain, I just get my finger cut off. A, I'm probably going to the hospital to be taken care of. And then B, calling the cops on Dexter for trying to murder him. What's the worst that would happen there is Dexter says, "Hey, you're actually the kidnapper," which the captain's done such a good job lying this whole time. He very easily could say, "Hey, you're lying. You're a psychopath. You tried to kill me." And I think people would side with Captain Spencer. I don't think they would side with Dexter here, which feels like a major plot hole to me personally. I don't know how Dexter expected him to immediately just drive to captive Nikki at this point. But either way, that's how the episode ends. It just feels a little bit sloppy to me personally. I get Dexter's point of, hey, I can't kill the captain. I need to kind of bait him into showing me where Nikki is before I do that. But I'm not sure that's the path the captain would have taken. Not to mention, you left all that saran wrap back at the arcade. You're just going to leave that there? I don't really know. But either way, it just feels like a little bit sloppy in my opinion. So hopefully in the next episode, we get some better decisions made there. So overall, what do you think of the episode? What'd you like or dislike? I don't mean to give the impression that I dislike the episode, because I just figure for review purposes, point out some inconsistencies and some flaws here and there. How do you think the season ultimately concludes? Are we going to get any standout scenes going forward? Are we going to have any more developments with characters like Gio, Clark, Tanya? Or does Dexter simply take care of Spencer and that be that? Will Brian's most recent crime scene come into play? Will he perhaps help Dexter in some way? And will Harry do something about Brian? Let me know which way you think things will go, because there's quite a few options here. And I've really enjoyed engaging with you guys down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to talk to you again soon.